On the morning of August 16, 1942, people across the southern edge of San Francisco looked up and saw a United States Navy blimp drifting above their homes. Something was wrong with it. Its engines were silent. Its enormous silver-gray envelope sagged in the middle. A length of rope scraped across rooftops as the aircraft slowly lost altitude. It struck telephone wires, showering the street with sparks, and finally collapsed across a row of houses and parked cars in Daly City. Firefighters ran toward the wreck, expecting injured men, flames, perhaps even an unexploded weapon. The door of the gondola was wide open. The radio still worked. The parachutes were still inside. So was the life raft. But the two pilots were gone. They had vanished somewhere between the Pacific Ocean and the California coast, leaving behind an airworthy military blimp that had somehow returned alone. And more than 80 years later, no one can say with certainty what removed them from it. The aircraft was designated L-8, although some crews called it Love 8. Before the war, it had been a Goodyear advertising blimp. After Pearl Harbor, the Navy acquired it for coastal patrols. Slow, quiet, and able to remain above one patch of ocean for hours, blimps were effective submarine hunters. The threat was real. Japanese submarines had attacked ships along the west coast and shelled an oil facility near Santa Barbara. L-8 carried 2 depth bombs and a machine gun. At 6:03 that Sunday morning, it lifted away from Treasure Island in San Francisco Bay. Lieutenant Ernest Cody was at the controls. He was regarded as calm and highly capable. Beside him was Anson Charles Adams, a veteran of lighter-than-air flight with thousands of hours of experience. Adams had received his officer's commission only the day before. This was his first patrol as an Anson. A third crewman had briefly climbed aboard that morning, but Cody ordered him off before takeoff, apparently because of the extra weight. It was a small decision that probably saved the man's life. The patrol was expected to last 4 hours and return around 10 in the morning. For the first 90 minutes, everything appeared normal. At 7:38, Cody reported the blimp's position a few miles east of the Farallones. 4 minutes later, another message arrived. I'm investigating suspicious oil slick. Stand by. It was the last transmission ever received from L-8. An oil slick could mean leaking fuel from a submarine below. Cody and Adams dropped 2 smoke-producing markers and began circling the area. They were not alone. The Liberty ship Albert Gallatin and the fishing vessel Daisy Gray were nearby. Men aboard both ships watched the blimp through binoculars. The first mate of the Daisy Gray could clearly make out 2 figures in the gondola. For more than an hour, L-8 circled at only a few hundred feet. At one point, it descended to roughly 30 feet above the water, as though the pilots were trying to inspect something just beneath the surface. Then, shortly after 9 o'clock, witnesses saw it release ballast, climb, and turn back toward San Francisco. The 2 men were still believed to be aboard. But they would never be seen again. Wing Control repeatedly called L-8. There was no answer. Search aircraft later spotted it at roughly 2,000 feet before it disappeared into the clouds. From a distance, it appeared to be flying normally. In reality, it may already have been empty. At about 11:15, L-8 emerged near Ocean Beach. Its engines were no longer running, and the envelope had begun to sag. The blimp briefly touched the sand. 2 fishermen grabbed its lines and tried to hold it, but it pulled away. Its gondola struck an embankment, dislodging one of its heavy depth bombs. Suddenly relieved of hundreds of pounds, L-8 rose into the air again. 15 minutes later, it came down in Daly City. When rescuers examined the gondola, they found no blood, no signs of a struggle, and no obvious mechanical failure. The door had been secured in the open position. A microphone used to communicate with ships below was hanging outside. The ignition remained on, and the radio was operational, although its battery had been drained. All 3 parachutes were neatly stored. The rubber life raft had not been deployed. The pilot's firearms and classified papers remained aboard. There was still fuel in the tanks. The only personal safety equipment missing was 2 yellow life jackets, exactly what Cody and Adams were required to wear during an overwater flight. Even the underside of the gondola contained a clue. Investigators found undisturbed dust in a compartment that was not watertight. It strongly suggested that L-8 had never landed on or been submerged in the sea. There is a popular version of this scene in which investigators also discovered warm coffee and a half-eaten sandwich, as if the crew had disappeared in the middle of breakfast. It is a wonderfully disturbing image, but it is almost certainly a later embellishment. Contemporary evidence does not confirm it. Other stories began circulating almost immediately. One witness claimed to have seen a parachute falling from the blimp. That could not be reconciled with the 3 parachutes found aboard. A woman on horseback reportedly looked through binoculars and saw not 2 men in the gondola, but 3. Those accounts were never verified, and they contradicted other witnesses who saw no one inside. Still, the report of a 3rd figure gave the mystery a darker shape. Local rumor and later retellings imagined a stowaway hiding inside L-8, waiting until the blimp was above the ocean before overpowering the pilots. But no evidence of a struggle was found, and the theory never explained how the supposed 3rd man also vanished. Wartime fear produced another possibility. Perhaps the oil slick really did mark a Japanese submarine. Perhaps Cody and Adams descended too low, made contact with its crew, and were captured. Japanese submarines truly were operating off California, so the story did not sound impossible to frightened residents. But no record, wreckage, or physical evidence has ever connected a submarine to L-8. Later theories became stranger. Some said the pilots were secret agents who defected and arranged a rendezvous at sea. Others claimed they fought over a woman, that one killed the other and then fell overboard. Decades later came stories of experimental radar, invisible microwaves, and, inevitably, alien abduction. These are legends, not conclusions. None has been supported by reliable evidence. But they survived because the official investigation left behind an empty space large enough for almost any nightmare to enter. The Navy interviewed 35 witnesses. It found no evidence of fire, enemy weapons, submersion, or misconduct. The aircraft had been inspected only days before the flight and was considered sound. The board concluded that there was no reason for Cody and Adams to leave L-8 voluntarily. Their abandonment of the aircraft, it said, must have been involuntary. The most practical explanation begins with the open door. Perhaps Adams knelt near it to drop a smoke marker or examine the water and lost his footing. Cody may have stopped the engines, opened the loudspeaker channel and tried to maneuver close enough to save him. The dangling microphone supports the possibility that someone was attempting to communicate with a man in the sea. Then Cody, reaching through the doorway, may also have fallen. With the sudden loss of both men's weight, L-8 would have climbed rapidly. As the helium expanded at altitude, pressure valves would release gas. The blimp would eventually become heavy again, descend, strike the beach, lose a depth bomb and rise once more, producing the strange, crewless journey witnessed that morning. It is a clean explanation. Almost. The sailors aboard the nearby ships were watching L-8 closely and said they never saw anyone fall. If only one man went overboard first, why did the other not transmit a distress call on a functioning radio? Why was the life raft not dropped? Why were neither the men nor their bright yellow life jackets ever found in calm, heavily traveled water? And if both pilots remained aboard when the blimp turned towards San Francisco after 9 o'clock, then whatever happened may not have occurred above the oil slick at all. The Pacific was searched by aircraft, Navy vessels, and the Coast Guard. The coastline was combed by military personnel, police, and civilians. Nothing was found. No body. No life jacket. No final message. A year later, Ernest Cody and Charles Adams were legally declared dead. L-8, however, survived. The Navy repaired it and returned it to service. Today, its gondola is preserved in a Naval Aviation Museum, restored to its August 1942 markings. The open doorway is still there. So is the space where two men sat before a patch of oil appeared on the water and their voices disappeared from the radio. The Navy could explain how an empty blimp climbed, drifted, and returned to land. It could explain the sagging envelope, the silent engines, and the second ascent from the beach. But it could never explain the first and most important event. How two experienced pilots left an airworthy aircraft without parachutes, without a life raft, and without a single call for help. The blimp came home. Its crew never did.